Alright, everybody, back with another one. Today we're going to do probably one more. This might be the last final episode we do on the situation with Charlie Kirk, just to, put an end to it and sum up the series of events, talk a little bit about a lot of what the internet is saying today and why some of it is important and why some of it is probably not. But, most of that will just be opinion. We're going to take a look at some biblical verses, some historical events, and some other interesting factors to do with Charlie Kirk. So to start this off, we've seen a lot of people on the internet over the last 2 weeks talking about Charlie Kirk everywhere, on every platform, every channel, every influencer, every news station. Clearly, this is the number one topic that everybody is discussing today. And there is more than just one reason for it, but there is a really big reason why. It's not just some person who was killed, and he's not just because he was a famous person, a political figure. It's bigger than that. It has to do with the spiritual battle that's going on in this world. And it has to do with where we are on the timeline of that battle at this point in history and what that's going to look like for the future of America. I'll break down my theory on what I think all of this means in the historical context of everything. But I want to start by addressing a lot of the conspiracies. There has been so many, and I have talked about this in previous videos, but there has been so many channels that have dove deep into the woods on a lot of the conspiracies about Charlie Kirk, a lot of the conspiracies around his death, a lot of, talking about different, things with shooting, how that occurred, who was involved or who may have been involved. And it's gotten so out of hand that it's really at a point where America is for sure split intellectually where we are today on the way that we think, the way that our thought processes are. We're very much split on facts. There are definitely certain groups of people that live by certain facts that they believe are the truth and that they live by them as though they are part of reality. Then there's groups of people that live by completely opposite information that they deem facts, and they live by that as though they're equally the same level of fact in their life. And it's really created a divide intellectually in the world, but especially in America today, because many people are almost living on different timelines of reality. They're almost living in a mindset where they see, and obviously life is perception too, but where they see the world in a certain way, and they're actually able to live out that way as though it exists in reality and completely block out anything else that contradicts that. Now, we can all do this, obviously, because we can decide how to perceive the world. But there are people that are blindly believing things that are not true and then living by that and swearing by that as though it's their gospel. And then they're completely blocking out anything that contradicts that, even if it's in reality, even if it's right in their face, if it's on the news, if it's being talked about by millions of people online, doesn't matter. They're finding a way to block that out of their brain so that they can stay in their reality, in their mind, that their mind has created or that people online have created for them to think on and to imagine and live by. And it's definitely not helping many people today. It's definitely not helping them. It's definitely a huge distraction that is doing a couple different things. Number one is it's distracting them from living their everyday lives. It's distracting them from doing the things that they should be doing in life, focusing on cultivating the relationships in their life with the people that are around them and, you know, enjoying their company, getting to make memories together, fulfilling God's purpose for them, going out and doing things in the world to make their mark. You know, this is really starting to impact people in a negative way where they are so distracted by all this nonsense that it's hindering their growth. It's stopping their ability to just live a normal life. And it's really hurting their relationships, not just with people, but with God. And we're seeing a lot of this today. Past 2 weeks, I've seen so many different conspiracies that it should really make a lot of people who are into that stuff take a step back and say, all of these things cannot be true at the same time. And if I don't know which ones are the truth right now, I should probably let it go and leave it be. And if the truth comes out, then I'll know. And if it doesn't, that's fine. I could believe what I want to believe, but why choose to believe something that you're not sure about, or that is not definitive, or that does not have enough evidence behind it where it's almost impossible to not be true? Some of these conspiracies are so ridiculous and contradicting that you should be able to see that it is designed that way on purpose to distract you, confuse you, and then make you believe that nothing is true. Make you believe that everything is fake, everything is make believe. We're living in a simulation, life is completely controlled by a small group of people, and all this other stuff. And the most important thing that it does that's really detrimental is it takes away the God factor. It takes away God existing, but it also takes away God's ability to control situations. And you're putting that power in the hands of man. And then you're living as though life is hopeless now because it's out of your control. It's in the control of a small group of people, and they determine everything that you can and cannot do. So you might as well just give up. Do you not realize that that is exactly what the devil wants for you and for everybody? He wants people to give up hope. In hell, it is talked about that there is a sense of hopelessness, absolutely pure hopelessness, where you have no hope whatsoever. Now, you could be on earth and think you experience what hopelessness is like, and you're probably getting a fraction of what that actually is compared to how it is in hell. On earth, yeah, things could be really bad. You could be down on your luck. You could be poor. You could be homeless. You could be, sick. You could have so many things that are not going your way. But there's always a glimmer of hope. There's always a chance that somebody drives by, gets out of a limo, and hands you a stack of cash, and you're homeless on the street, and now you take that and you can go get a meal or go find shelter. There's a sense of hope where in any situation, if you're in prison, there's a sense of hope that somebody discovers something wrong in your case and you get freed, or you are ill and all of a sudden a miracle happens and you make a turnaround. In hell, there's absolutely no chance ever for the rest of eternity, at least that's how it's viewed, that you will ever get out and that you will ever be reunited with your loved ones or with God ever again. For all of eternity, you will suffer there in torment. That's true hopelessness, where there's absolutely no chance of anything ever happening to go in your favor. On earth, we don't have that. The devil wants people to feel a sense of hopelessness. He wants people to feel as though there's no sense of doing anything worth fulfilling God's will for you because it's out of your control. It'll never be in your control. It's in the control of someone else. And it's just too bad. No matter what you do, you'll never be able to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. If you have hopelessness, you should know that that is coming from a place of evil. It is not coming from God. And if watching all these conspiracies and learning about them is creating a sense of hopelessness in you, you should probably understand that a lot of that stuff is coming from evil. It's designed that way on purpose to confuse you, to make you think that everything you see and everything you learn and everything you know is not real or out of your control, and to just give up so that you don't actually live life, that you don't actually fulfill God's will. These conspiracies are so ridiculous. They're saying that Charlie didn't get shot. It wasn't a bullet. It wasn't from the front. It was from the back. No, it wasn't from the back. It was from the side. No, he, didn't get shot. It was a blood packet. Actually, he didn't die. He's still alive. Actually, he's a clone. That was a clone. That wasn't even Charlie. That's not Erica. The list goes on and on. It's ridiculous. And again, it is designed to confuse the hell out of you and make you honestly not believe anything. And there's a reason for that. Because if you start believing into all these lies and then you find out later that they're not true, you're going to be that much more hesitant to read and believe in the words in the Bible and turn your life over to Christ, because there's always that fear of, what if that's not real? Since I can't see it, touch it, use my actual earthly senses to know for sure God is real, you have to have a bit of belief. You have to have faith. And if you already put your faith into something that turned out to not be true, it's very hard for you to do that again for something else. This is designed this way on purpose. Now, that doesn't mean that conspiracies don't exist. A conspiracy literally just means when two or more people get together in secret and plan on doing something that someone outside party or somebody that they're planning on doing it with or to is not aware of it. That's all a conspiracy is. So yes, conspiracies exist, and there are things that are happening behind closed doors with powerful people, but that does not mean that everything is a conspiracy. And it does not mean that everybody's lying to you all the time. Everybody's in on it. Anything that goes wrong is either not true, or it's a secret operation, or, like now you have all these MAGA people turning on Trump once again because they're very weak. And anytime something happens that doesn't go in their favor, rather than just sitting back and waiting and seeing and letting God reveal it to them, or letting life unfold, they have to know right this second. And if they don't, they start making up fake things to believe. So now they're turning on Trump and saying that he's in on it and that he was part of the team of people who killed Charlie, or who knows who killed Charlie and he's covering it up, and all these ridiculous things. My advice is, don't buy into the hype. Believe in all the nonsense. I'm not saying you can't watch what's out there. I'm not saying you can't see what's out there and take it in, think about it. Just don't hold on to it. Just don't buy into it where you believe into it wholeheartedly and now you're sold on it because somebody took the time to make it sound convincing. That's what sales is. Salespeople think about their products or their services. They find, different questions that you might ask, and they come up with answers to those questions ahead of time in order to convince you and sell you on that thing. Same thing with marketing. They come up with, you know, designs and visuals and, sounds, and they use all these different things that attack your senses to convince you and sell you on that thing. That doesn't mean those things are malicious. It doesn't mean marketing's bad. It doesn't mean sales is bad. It just means that people take the time to make something sound convincing and then sell it to you. So just because somebody took the time to put together a compilation of videos or come up with a theory that sounds credible because it's backed and matched with video or audio or images or something, does not make it true. It just means that person took the time to come up with a theory that they believe, and now they're trying to sell you on it. Or they're just trying to come up with something that seems ridiculous, outlandish, crazy, and get views and all the social media engagement. And that's what happens. A lot of that crazy stuff goes viral, even if it's not true, because it's shock and awe. It's the oldest trick in the book in terms of marketing. That's why they call them publicity stunts. We don't look at social media viral videos and stuff like that as that today, but a lot of that stuff is just publicity stunts. It's just a shock and awe that sells the audience on believing into it and or sharing it with other people, their peers, to spread the word about it. But it's the same thing at the end of the day. It's just a public relations stunt. It's a PR stunt. That's what it is. And not always. Some stuff is true. And I'm going to get into a few things today that could seem conspiratorial. And I'm not saying whether or not they're true. And when I do say stuff on here that I tell you about, I'm not selling you on these things as this is the truth. Don't believe somebody else. Believe my conspiracy theory. I'm simply saying this is a theory that I'm presenting, or this is something that I'm presenting based on information or facts or something online, but do not buy into it wholeheartedly. Do not believe it and now take it to the bank. Instead, either just watch it for entertainment and move on with your life, go live, have a nice day, or go and do the research and see if there's any credibility to this. But either way, the problem lies within identifying with these things, making them false idols, making them, buying into them so deeply that now they become a part of your personality and your identity. That's where we go wrong. It should really be you just taking this information and use it as a learning, use it as something that you now know new information. If you can use it to benefit your life, great. If not, leave it alone and move on. We're supposed to only have God as our idol. We're supposed to only have God as the thing that we look to, constantly turn to, worship, and be our sole idol. And when you put other things in the way of that, it takes away from God. And I've seen a lot of people do this with the Charlie Kirk thing, where they found so many reasons to take God out of the equation and instead replace him with all these other conspiracies and all of these things that are tied back to man, where man has the power and man was the one in control of this. So, what I'm going to try and do a little bit today is just bring it back to God, where maybe there's a bigger picture here. And maybe Charlie Kirk is just a small part of that bigger picture in a timeline of events that God has his hand on. And yes, God doesn't kill people, but he allows the devil to kill them if he sees that their time has come. If he sees that their mission was either fulfilled or there's nothing more that he can do to use them in this life, and they have made their bed, so now it's time for them to go to the afterlife and be judged and go wherever they're going. Or for the ones that are Christians and that are going to heaven, even if they're good, decent people like Charlie was, who really lived a decent life, and maybe God viewed him as perfect, like many other people throughout history in the Bible in biblical times. Job and Noah and Moses and many other people that he admitted himself in the Bible were perfect in his eyes because they lived good lives. They lived modest lives. They didn't do anything wrong. They didn't, sin based on the sins that are in the Bible. And they just, God had a mission for them. They carried out the mission and he felt it was done. So it was time for them to come back home. So in this instance, it could be as simple as Charlie Kirk started this Turning Point USA. He started the mission of re-educating young people in the school system, especially college, where the most amount of indoctrination happens. And he started reverse brainwashing them by having conversations with them, giving them a microphone and giving them a chance to say their piece and not just listen to somebody, not just sit in an audience and hear from somebody who has all the answers, but to have a dialogue with them and engage and debate even. He started a fire that has spread throughout many campuses in America and across the world now that has only gotten thousands of times greater now that he's been assassinated. So it seems to me that this was part of God's plan for him, that he had a mission. He was mission driven every day, and he said it. He got up every day, had all the energy in the world, went out, and his sole focus was building Turning Point USA and debating young people and bringing and preaching the gospel to them and spreading Christ's message, which is what we're called to do, by the way, as Christians, and especially as Americans. And he did that with about 1,000 schools he had chapters in across the country before he died. But his time had come, and God obviously knew that his mission would only become greater after he was gone, rather than him being here and continuing this uphill battle. He was taken out in a an uncomfortable way where the world had to see it, and there was, it's not the most it's not the nicest way to go out. Nicest way would probably just be an old man and die in your bed. Listen, I mean, life's not perfect. There's been plenty of people that were martyred in God's name and brutally and publicly, but their story goes on and is told about their mission and what they did in the world, and not so much about the gory or gruesome way that they died. People don't really remember that. And I don't think a lot of people will remember this. I think they'll remember more who he was and what he did in this world. So we're going to take a look at a few things today. We're going to start with a timeline of events that have something in common with Charlie Kirk's death. And then we're going to get into some biblical stuff and some other interesting things. The goal is not to make this a conspiracy. The goal is just to bring God back into this situation so that people don't just think this has to do with men or mankind rather, and that man has all the power and a secret group of people did this and they, did it because they hate Charlie Kirk for speaking out about him, about them or whatever. And this was their way of shutting, you know, him up. Well, if that's the case, how come that same or similar group of people tried to kill Trump on multiple occasions and they couldn't? Even when they took a shot at his head, nobody, no sniper, no professional, anybody, could have purposely tried to shoot him through the ear. But he turned his head and they hit his ear. Well, that's because God gave divine intervention and saved Trump. Why didn't he save Charlie? Charlie was probably a better man in many ways than Trump. It was obviously for a reason. But it's not some big conspiracy. I'm just bringing God back to this conversation because a lot of people are trying to make it as though, they're taking him out of it. And they're even saying that, no, there's no miracles with this. It can't be possible that he got shot in the neck and, you know, his entire body didn't explode and all these ridiculous things. Anything is possible. Miracles can exist with anything in life. There has been so many miracles throughout time that it's unbelievable. I could tell you many stories about miracles that happened either to me personally or to, people throughout time and history. Miracles can happen in any circumstance or situation. For the people out there that are taking the miracle factor out of this situation, you're doing a disservice to God because you're basically saying that there's no such thing as miracles, or miracles apply, but they just don't apply to this. Well, if God is the God of everything and his miracles can apply to anything, they can apply to everything. So we're going to take a look at a few things. Let's start with a timeline of events throughout American history that have to do with the same date that Charlie Kirk was killed, which was September 10th, 2025. So not obviously the same day of 2025, that year, but September 10th. So it's really simple. I just took the date that he died, September 10th, and saw if it had any relevant historical context, meaning were there any days throughout history, any big events, any significant events that happened on that same date? Because there is something with dates and God. That's probably why there's some numerology throughout the Bible, some consistency, some similarities with numerology, numbers, things like that. Not the occultic numerology and symbolism, but from God's standpoint, because there are things to do with numbers that actually do match up with God and his wisdom or his events, miracles, whatever. And numbers do play some sort of a role, not just throughout time, but also, just in existence. And we can go in that in detail in a future episode. I don't want to get too much in the weeds with that, but there are some historical events that have happened on this date that I found kind of interesting. So we'll look at some of the older ones from the beginning of this country. You did have some battles that happened on this date. And this is, again, September 10th throughout history. 1755, the Battle of Lake George, Indian War. 1877, Washington moves to defend Philadelphia on the eve of the Battle of Brandywine. So that's a huge significant event to do with the Revolutionary War and the founding of this country. 87, the U.S. Constitution nears completion. It's almost done. They're having their final debates on September 10th to hammer out what this Constitution is going to be. So that's a really significant date because that's the founding of this country and the founding documents for this country. And interestingly enough, Charlie Kirk was a huge patriot, loved America, loved this country. Some similarity. He died on the same day, September 10th, the Battle of Lake Erie, 1812, War of 1812. 1 year later, another battle, So there's some interesting stuff throughout, the earlier part of America. But then when you get into the last 100 years or so, you have some interesting things that tie a little bit more closely into Charlie Kirk. Now, again, not to get conspiratorial, these are just interesting things that I found that correlate with that date. That doesn't mean that these are prophetic and they directly tie to Charlie. It's just interesting that there's a correlation with the date. So you have this day in 1850, California became the 30th of America. And what's interesting with that is just a small similarity that I thought about in my mind is that California is a very liberal state. California is one of the few states that has been very much against God, turning away from God, and becoming more and more woke with a lot of this, you know, anti-God agenda that is really corrupted the soul of America throughout the last 100 and so years. And it's became a state the same day, 150 plus years, before Charlie Kirk was killed. The New York City bombing. That's another really interesting one. A bomb exploded outside the Federal Hall National Memorial on Wall Street, foreshadowing the larger 1920 Wall Street bombing. So you had New York City bombing, 1919, and then 2001, the World Trade Centers were essentially bombed, but attacked. And even before that, actually, in the 90s, the World Trade Centers were bombed. Somebody put a bomb in the building, actually exploded. But then 2001, you had planes, and that was September 11th, the day after September 10th. So that's another interesting thing. Then you have a senator that was shot and killed in Baton Rouge. Interestingly enough, Charlie Kirk was shot and killed. But the one that I found was really interesting, which is so silly because it's an entertainment thing. There's no historical context other than the fact that you know, it's part of history now. A show called Gunsmoke, which was actually a very popular show in the 50s, premiered on CBS for the first time, and it's called Gunsmoke, and Charlie Kirk was shot to death with a gun. I just found that interesting. Democrat presidential nominee JFK addresses Protestant ministers. So JFK was also shot and killed, assassinated. And on that day, he was speaking with Protestant ministers who are Christians. And was he a Catholic? And Charlie Kirk, again, another, big religious person who professed his faith, believed in Jesus Christ, also got shot and killed. And not everything lines up, not everything matches that date. It's just some interesting stuff where sometimes you can take a look at history and you can see where there are some similarities, there are some commonalities, there are some things that stand out that are, we can consider them coincidences. And you could say there's no such thing as coincidences, and you that may or may not be true. Some stuff doesn't correlate at all to this specific event. It maybe it correlates to something else. I don't know, but I just find it interesting that some of this stuff happened. And then you also have the X-Files premiered on Fox. Now, the X-Files, if you don't know, was a huge show back in the 90s about conspiracies. And it was all about different types of conspiracies, government agency uncovering all kinds of conspiracies. It was a huge show. It was probably the first real big conspiracy show, um, besides like the Twilight Zone. But this one was really very specifically about conspiracies. Right now, we're going through a time where people are making all kinds of conspiracies about Charlie Kirk's death. And I find it quite interesting that on this exact same day in 1993, a show about conspiracies called The X-Files premiered on TV. Also, it was the day before 9/11. Now, that's the real key here. That's the real big thing, I think, that is really what this is all about, in my opinion. You have 9/11 that happened in 2001, just after the beginning of the new, not only a new decade, but a new millennium. And at that time, there was all this talk about the end of the world, the clocks run out, Y2K, all this stuff. And, we're not going to make it into the 2000s again. Even back then, there were conspiracies. It was a whole big thing. People literally made life decisions based on Y2K, based on the end of the 90s and the new year going into the 2000s, they were sure the world was going to end. And it didn't. Here we are 25 years later, going on 26 years. And none of that crap that they thought was going to happen happened. But at the time, it was a huge conspiracy that a lot of people were afraid and focused on and worrying about. What I think that was a shifting in the nation. It was a turning point at that time. See, America had gone downhill for a very long time. Since the 60s, America had started to really go downhill fast. We had turned to heathenism. We had let another country's culture, with the British invasion and the Beatles and things like that, invade our country. And it changed the soul of America. It changed our culture from things being, nice and clean and family oriented and having class and decency to a point in time where everything was about liberation and being free and being naked and on drugs and all these crazy things that totally destroyed the soul and the class of America. And people started dressing like hippies. People started getting out of suits and getting out of all this like nice, beautiful look where people look nice and professional and well put together. And they totally destroyed everything. They destroyed the look of people. They destroyed their attitude. They destroyed their patriotism and love for America. And just before that, we had been in a couple of major wars that really made America more patriotic than ever, especially World War II. But the 60s was the beginning of a slope downhill. And the 70s was worse. People got even more into drugs and rock and roll. The 80s was pretty bad because there was a lot of like heavy narcotics. That was the big cocaine era. And that was when people really started becoming deeply vain, where they would step on their own mother to make money on the stock market and all kinds of stuff like that. And the 90s became like a very nihilistic era where people were super into materialism and buying all kinds of dumb trinkets and nonsense just to say they had it and to keep up with the Joneses. And everything was about, artificial prosperity and putting people's money into materialism and things and fake stuff that didn't really benefit their life and taking it away from legacy and building the American dream. When the 90s ended and we went into the 2000s, I believe that was a turning point in America where God had given us several decades to change our ways. And when we didn't, a curse was put on this nation. And it had a ticking time for America to turn back to God. And if we would not do that, it would probably be the end of America. And I think we got to that point. We went through 9/11. 9/11 was for sure a curse on this nation. And it was a warning from God that people had fallen so far away from Him and they were headed down the wrong path that this was a wake up call. Change your ways, or this will be the end of this nation, America. And it will fall just like every other great nation throughout history because we took God out of our country, which is who originally founded this nation was God. This nation was originally founded, I've spoken about this in previous episodes, as the first nation in world history to be a declared Christian nation and a home for all people, but for Christians especially, to be a safe place for them to practice what they believe and to be openly preaching and sharing the gospel, not just to each other in the country, but to the world. And God knew He needed to build a strong nation to be able to do that. Otherwise, we would get trampled on by other nations throughout the world who did not want the message of the gospel to be spread. So America was specifically entrusted with this hugely important mission from God to be the nation that would be the first one in the world to be a whole collective nation with the calling of spreading the gospel throughout the other nations of the world. So this nation was chosen for that. And for a long time, we had been that. Many Americans had modeled Christianity. And we weren't perfect. And every decade had people who were not Christians, even in the very beginning. And every decade saw people that claimed to be Christians, but their actions didn't show it. So it doesn't mean America was perfect as a whole. It doesn't mean all of its people in America were perfect. It just means America was created to be this nation that was called by God to carry out his will of being a Christian nation and spreading the gospel across the world. Because that is God's ultimate plan before the end of times, is to have the gospel preached to every corner of the earth and for every human being on earth to have the opportunity to accept Jesus into their life. If they don't, that's up to them, but they at least have to have the opportunity to. And so when 9/11 came, we were cursed. A curse was put on this nation. We were cursed by having many of our people killed, innocent people just working in those attacks, but then also a war following it on this nation with other nations far away and our people being sent to go fight in that war. And then a political takeover where the nation really went downhill in many ways. The politicians started really ruining this country. The people got further and further away from God, lost more hope, and so many other things. And for a long time, America had gone downhill with tragedy and horrible event one after another. You had 2001 with 9/11, 2003 with the war in Iraq. You had 2008 with the economic crash, the housing market crash that didn't just affect America, it affected the entire world, or at least most of it. And it put us in a depression for many, many years. Then we had several different administrations for presidents that were horrible to this nation. And that includes both Republicans and Democrats, not just one or the other. These politicians had an agenda to get America further and further away from God, and they were very successful at it, to a point where, at one point, Americans were not even saying Merry Christmas to each other out of fear of having a conflict in public. Companies were doing away with anything to do with Christ or Christianity, anything to do with only specifically that religion and not other religions. And we were accepting a lot of things that Americans and Christians would have not accepted before. But it wasn't because we were just weak. It was also because we had lost our faith in God. And when we went away from God, we lost the will to fight. And then after that, you had a lot of other things that happened. You had, the Obama years, which were very devastating to this country. You had Trump coming in and all the controversy around that, the power struggle, the war between different classes, different parties, different groups of people, until eventually getting to the 2020 election, COVID, all of stuff. And then when Trump won again in 2024, the tide had just started to turn to where there was a glimmer of hope that America might have a fighting chance, where its government were actually, for the first time in a long time, on the side of the people and trying to restore the rights of the people and the power back to the people. And all that time, during the Trump years at least, you had a young man fighting the brainwashing and re-education that a lot of these young people were experiencing on college campuses and in schools throughout America, being indoctrinated with lies and propaganda, and all being controlled by a central organization called the Board of Education, where they decided and dictated to the parents what their children would learn regardless of what they say, and to the states what they will teach the children in their schools regardless of how the states felt, because it was federalized. But this young man had the courage, no matter that, to go and fight on these campuses and give people a chance to snap out of their brainwashing and have a true debate, talk about the things that they were being taught in the schools, talk about the brainwashing that they had accepted to be truth, and have an honest debate with this person to see if their thoughts and ideas held up against his, and also their beliefs. And I've seen this man interview many different types of people. I've seen him interview people from different political backgrounds, being independents, Democrats, liberals, even people who are extremely woke. But as a Christian, I've also seen him interview people who were not Christians. He interviewed people who were, similarly aligned to him, but maybe different denominations, all the way up to Jews, Muslims, and even atheists. And I've even seen him interview Satanists, people who openly declare they hate God and love Satan. But he spoke to and with everybody with truth and with dignity. He didn't put them down. He didn't bash or belittle them. He gave them an opportunity to speak, and he genuinely tried to help them understand where he was coming from and have a change of heart, but also have a change of mind, have a change of thought process. Think about things a different way and just maybe see where he was coming from. He transformed many schools and students throughout this country. And when he was killed, like I said in my previous video, it wasn't because of some rogue nation or a small group of people that wanted him dead because they were, he was talking about things that, by the way, plenty of other people were talking about. It was because he was the only person in America that was making a huge impact on reverse brainwashing the students of America who the government and many other affiliated people have had such a stronghold on for the last since the 80s, so about 40 plus years now, that they have been slowly but surely brainwashing the youth of this nation year after year into thinking a certain way about the world, having a worldview and a perspective that they feed them, but then also thinking negatively about our own nation, losing patriotism, and even hating the family. That's why the birth rate has gone down. People have been miseducated into thinking that they should put their own selfish needs above having families. They should put career and money and fun and, you know, quote unquote, living life over doing the thing that God put us here to do: create families, have a lot of children, and carry out His will. And the more people there are, the better the chance there is to carry out His will. The less people, the less better, right? This is what has happened over time. But Charlie Kirk has made a huge impact that now, especially, won't go away. I mean, it's over now. Like the amount of applications that he got to have turning point chapters on schools throughout not just the country, but the world is going to change the education system probably for a very long time, decades, if not a century or two. But I believe the decision was made by God. Whether or not the people were going to turn back to him, if Trump won the 2024 election, it was only because God had allowed it to happen, because the people were turning back to him. So he was giving this nation one more chance at redemption, one more chance at having this nation be great again, as Trump says. But when Charlie was killed, it wasn't because of some big conspiracy. Yeah, it probably was a professional hit, and it probably was not that young kid lone gunman, but he was killed because of what he was doing and the impact he was making on school campuses and with students. But he was also killed because God allowed it, which means his bigger plan was accomplished. And it looks to me as though, and I could be wrong, don't take this to heart. Don't look at this as a conspiracy to believe in now, as though this is the gospel. It's just my opinion based on the things that I'm seeing, the things that I've seen unfold for a very long time. It seems as though Charlie Kirk's death was the final nail in the coffin of the curse on America. And the curse being us falling away from God spiritually and becoming atheists and other things, and politically, us falling into the hands of socialism. It seems to me that Charlie Kirk was sacrificed for America, for the American people to be free again, to have their nation back, and to turn back to God and be saved from socialism, atheism, Satanism, every other thing that contradicts God and Christianity, so that this nation could be restored to the once great nation that it was, and to be a Christian nation once again, filled with people who are going to share the gospel, not just to each other, but around the world. So I think the 9/11 event was the beginning of the curse on this nation. And people have said for a while now, you're starting to see millennials and other people come out saying the 90s was the last great decade. And that since then, people feel as though life has sucked. Things in this nation really don't feel like they had, any culture. Each decade, you can really look at it and see the things about that decade that made it independent from the others. In the 60s, you had certain movies and TV shows that were culturally impacting the nation, certain clothing design styles, certain music, certain, hairstyles and ways that people talk, the words that they use, the slang, and then the ideas that people had, the activities that they did. Those were things that made the 60s. And the same thing with the 70s had all those things, but for their decade. 80s, the 90s, you can all think of things that fit that decade in those categories. In the 2000s, you really can't think of much. You can think of a handful of things. Most of it has to do with technology. But if you take technology out of the equation, those decades are empty. They have no soul. They have no culture. So I believe that was part of the curse that was put on this nation. America lost its soul. And I think America just got it back with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, which really is a sacrifice. I believe the curse is now ended. It does not mean that there won't be turmoil on this nation. It does not mean that we won't have to fight more battles and we won't even go to wars. I just think that God has finally forgiven the people for turning from him. And in the name, the turning point, I believe Charlie Kirk was the turning point. He was the human turning point for this nation, the turning point of the end of the curse, marking the end of the curse on this nation and turning the people back to God. Now, again, I could be wrong, and we will see in years to come. But I believe this is the beginning of good times. I believe that next year is probably going to be one of the greatest years in American history with the 250-year mark of our anniversary of this nation being founded. But I also believe that it's going to be a huge revival year for people turning back to God through Christ. I think it's going to change a lot of things in this nation, the way we do things. But I also think it's going to actually bring more people together, not start a crusade. It's going to probably bring more people together and unite all different types of people under God and under the patriotism of America. Now, I want to take a look at a few more things that sort of tie this in together. But that's my point. That's my case. That's what I think is going on here. And I think the bigger picture has to do with curse that was put on this nation, God forgiving us, and the turning point of us going back to being the once great nation that we were, but headed into a future that's going to look different. We're not going to go back in time and do things the way that they were back then, but we're going to have good times again. And a light is going to shine on this nation once again for a while, I think, for decades to come and for generations to come. And I think a lot of that is going to have to do with Gen A, Gen Alpha, which is coming up now. But we'll get into that again later. I've talked about it in the past. Let's take a look at a few interesting Bible verses that I found. Going back to the whole date and numbers thing, I took, again, the date of September 10th, 2025, and I just found some verses that were 1025 and lined up with, or chapter 9, verses 1025, correlated a little bit or sound like they have similarities with Charlie Kirk and maybe some of the stuff that he was doing. And it's the same date that he died. So this one's Hebrews 10:25. Not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. That's really interesting to me because it's literally talking about not giving up, gathering together, like the habit that you had doing, which is what, Charlie Kirk did. He got large groups of people to gather together and have live public debates. He could have had private debates. He could have invited random people off the street to his podcast studio and debated them, but instead he chose to do it in front of a bunch of people and have huge audiences. Not giving up on meeting together, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. That's so interesting because it's such a specific thing that's talking about something that's very similar to what Charlie Kirk used to do. Another one is John 10:25. Jesus answered, I tell you, but you do not believe. The works I do in my Father's name testify about me. Again, that's another interesting thing. Charlie was a huge Christian, believed in Christ, openly professed his Christianity and his beliefs. And it's interesting because he would profess his faith and what he knew to be the truth to people. And a lot of them that weren't believers did not believe them, did not believe him, did not believe what he had to say. But then it goes on to say, the works I do in my Father's name testify about me. Well, now what are we seeing? A lot of videos are coming out showing Charlie's faith. And he said himself he wanted to be remembered for his faith above all else. Well, guess what? Now you're seeing many videos about Charlie Kirk come out showing his works, not just videos of him talking to people and telling them about Jesus, but showing his works, showing the type of man that he was, showing the relationship he had with his wife and his kids and his friends and his colleagues. That's really interesting to me because it kind of tells of not just Jesus in this passage, but the type of man that Charlie was and how all Christians should be, a model of Christ. Proverbs 10:25. When the storm has swept by, the wicked are gone, but the righteous stand firm forever. How interesting is that one? There's a storm right now because his death was unexpected. It was violent. There's controversy between people, and there's a lot of infighting. There's people turning against Trump and the MAGA movement because they think that somehow they're responsible. There's people turning against other political groups or other you know national groups, blaming them. But it says, when the storm passes, the wicked are gone and the righteous stand firm forever. Well, look at how many people are also, while this is going on, opening their Bibles again for the first time. Look at all these people going online saying how the death of Charlie Kirk inspired them to pick up a Bible again, which they either hadn't done for a very long time or never did their entire life. That is a huge feat. And look at that. These people are turning to Christ as all this infighting's going on, as all these people are online talking about conspiracies. There are non-believers being woken up right now and turning back to Christ because of being witness to who Charlie Kirk was and how he was unjustly murdered. So there are just some interesting things that are from the Bible, some random passages, but they have the same numbers that the date of his death have. And I find them sort of correlating to him and his mission and what he did and who he was. I'm not saying that those things are written about Charlie in the Bible. It's not a prophecy about him in the Bible. It's just correlated because there are commonalities there. But now we're going to dive a little bit more into some hard stuff, which is about his name. You might have seen at the memorial, somebody, I forget who it was, it might have been Ben Carson, it might have been somebody else, said that that Kirk, the name Kirk means church. And we actually can take a look at that here today. There's a website called Behind the Name. This is a good source to use for looking up the meaning of names. And so the gender is masculine, which is another thing. It's a last name, typically. Sometimes it's a first name, but it's a masculine name. And it's from an Old English and Scottish surname meaning church. So think about it. He went around gathering groups of people together outside and talking about all kinds of things. Yeah, politics too, but a lot of times he talked about his faith. He talked about God. He talked about the Bible. He brought up passages in the Bible. He spoke about, a whole bunch of different religious and spiritual things. And in the past, we would look at that as like, revival, like tent revivals out in, the middle of an open area with literally with a tent. Like he used to sit under a tent and talk to large groups of people. So in a way, you could look at that as church because church is just a place where people gather together to speak about God and to worship and pray. And in some ways, that can be viewed as church. what he was doing. But what's equally interesting is that his first name, Charlie or Charles, means man or army. And think about when you put those two together, right? A lot of times we write last name, comma, first name. His name translates to church army. How interesting is that? That collectively, it's what it means. But also, army as well is a large group of militant people. Well, think about that. Think about how many times he had tons of people gathered together in these locations to talk to him, and they were militant on their beliefs, whether they were on his side or against him. So I find it interesting that there is a lot of commonalities in numbers and words. I'm big on language. I think that a lot of words have meaning, and we have to be careful what we say because words do have power to a certain degree, especially in our believing and internalizing and stuff like that. Names too. Names are big. If you name your child something that is um, has a certain meaning, you might be surprised that they live out that meaning without even knowing what the meaning of the name was beforehand. But I find this really interesting. Well, so that's it for this video. I just wanted to, add a little context to this conversation about Charlie Kirk. I wanted to maybe add some things that not that many people, or if anybody, was talking about with the historical events that seem, like they correlate a little bit, the biblical passages, and then the name meanings and the whole, big picture scope of the curse on the nation and how it probably was lifted now with that final sacrifice. It's a little different than some of the other videos people doing. I know that a lot of people are doing prophecy videos talking about, predicting the prophecy of Charlie Kirk and then Erica Kirk and how she's taking over Turning Point, which, by the way, I think that there is a lot there with that. I think that, maybe that Kim Clement prophecy with, talking about that woman, it could very well be Erica. It could very well be that she's going to rise up and now take on Turning Point and turn it into this even bigger thing that Charlie had originally built and carry on the torch to the next generation. And who knows? I think he has a son. His son might carry on his legacy. Like I said, Gen Alpha is going to be a big part of the future of America and being healed and revived. It's going to be that generation. And his son is a part of it. His son is Gen Alpha. Maybe his son becomes the next big thing, the next face of Turning Point when he's older and leads that organization bigger than his father ever could have imagined it. So we don't know what the future brings, but do not take God out of the equation and do not take away the miracle factor. Miracles are possible with anything, any circumstance at all. So that's pretty much it. Have faith, believe, and if you don't, seek out. God will show you where to go, and He'll put the right people in your path to help you with that. But there is a revival happening in this nation again, and the final nail in the coffin on the curse, to me, was Charlie Kirk. But let me know what you think. Put your feelings and thoughts and everything in the comments. Share the video if you agree with whatever I'm saying here, and get it out to other people that you think they might have an opinion on it or they might need to hear this message. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. Always keeps the channel growing and gives me the ability to continue to put out content. But let me know your thoughts. That's the main thing. Let me know what you're thinking. Let me know how you feel. Put it in the comments. If you don't want to put it in the comments, you can DM me. I'll have a conversation with you. And I try to respond as quickly as I can, but I do try to get back to everybody no matter what. So if you do, comment and DM me, I will definitely get back to you. That's it for this video. Don't forget to watch the ad at the end of the video. Also, take a look at some of the products that we have, some of the sales we have going on right now on our Amazon storefront, the apparel shop that we have, percentage of profits go to charities, and the children's book I wrote, which is on sale right now. That's it for this video. Stay tuned for the next one. All right, everybody, I just want to take a moment to promote my children's book. This is Little Boy Full of Love. That's me on the back. And this is a little sneak peek on the inside. It's a great book. It's a children's book. I actually wrote this for my son, and it's available right now on Amazon, Walmart, Barnes & Noble, Indigo, bookshop.org, and a lot of other online platforms. But more importantly to me, it's actually available in a lot of bookstores throughout the country. You can find out which ones are closest to you on my Instagram page. You know, we highly recommend that you shop local, buy from a local bookstore. So if you are looking to, you know, get a children's book for you or anybody you know, or even with the holidays coming up, it's a great time to, you know, buy a children's book as a gift. You know, definitely get it from a bookstore that's local to you. But if you absolutely can't get it from one of the bookstores that are currently carrying it right now, and we're in about 15 or 16 different states across the country, so it may actually be in your state, and it could even be local to you. But if you can't get it from the physical bookstore, check out our Amazon storefront. The book's available on there right now. And like I said, with the holidays coming up, you may want to do your Christmas or Hanukkah or holiday shopping early, and you can even order it from our Amazon storefront and ship it directly to whoever you're gifting it to. But it's available on those platforms, Amazon storefront and bookstores and other websites that I mentioned. But I want to take a moment here to look at the storefront just to give you an idea of some other stuff that we have available on there. These are products that we highly recommend. They are things that we use in our daily lives, and it's all organized by category. So it's a lot easier to, you know, shop for the holidays and specifically for things that interest you, particular categories. Available right now, many different items on our storefront. If you can see here, 61 items just in women's apparel, fall decor, because right now we're in fall, 26 items, kitchen items, you know, baking specifically, things for around the house, children's toys, even stuff for parties. If you're trying to save money on a party and throw in your own, you know, occasion, you can even buy some cool gadgets here to help you, you know, put on a better party. You know, health and wellness items here, even stuff for Christmas. And there's the book right there. So you can get it from the storefront. You can get it from the bookstores, like I mentioned. But it's available on all these different platforms. It's really easy to find and gift to somebody. Also, I want to show you the apparel shop, and these are some clothing items that we actually produced. So if you're looking to get some cool apparel items, you know, shirts, hoodies, long sleeve, short sleeve, leggings, even accessories, cell phone cases, women's makeup bags, fanny packs, coffee mugs, all different types of stuff, even some, you know, art, all different categories here, apparel, homeware, accessories, drinks, even digital items. It's all on this store, healthybodygoodssoul.com. Anything that pertains to you or somebody that you're looking to get a gift for the holidays. A lot of great designs on here, a lot of cool designs that we actually custom created. Stainless steel water bottles, especially now with the fall and winter. A lot of cool hoodies and long sleeve shirts. This is a really cool one, I think, for women. The original Be Your Soul apparel, that one's actually really popular. People tend to like that. This one's one of my favorites. The free shirt. It's the American flag, and it says free, and that says not property of the United States government. That one's pretty cool. Got all different types of tank tops, hoodies, long sleeve, short sleeve, tote bags, coffee mugs, even some items for kids, backpacks. So if you're the type that likes to, you know, plan ahead, I would definitely recommend ordering from the Amazon storefront or the apparel shop within the next couple of weeks to get everything in time for the holidays. Use code SAVE15 on the apparel shop to save 15% off everything on the storefront. So order within the next week or two, and you'll definitely have everything in time for the holidays. Definitely check out all the links to everything, the Amazon storefront, the book, and the apparel shop in my bio on all my platforms, Rumble, YouTube, Instagram, Spotify. But you can also find them in all the show notes for every episode that I post and get all your orders in time for the holidays. All right, that's it for this video. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. It helps the channel continue to grow. And put in the comments things that you would like me to talk about and make videos on for the future, and I will definitely do my best to do that. Stay tuned for the next one.